How many of you have stress in your life? Okay. Is there anybody out there who doesn't? Okay. If you had raised your hand, I would ask you to give the talk instead. So I like to talk about that because that's really what my talk is about. And I understand that you've had some introduction earlier today about the value of stress reduction and all of that sort of thing. And I want to talk about stress in a little bit different way. So I'm a psychologist, and as Dr. Song says, I work in the Department of Psychiatry at UCSD, and I specialize in working with not so much psychiatry patients as people who have medical diseases and illnesses and symptoms, and helping them find ways to come to terms with them and to enhance their qualities of life and to reduce their stress. But I have a little bit of a different twist on how I do that. So I want you to take a moment to think about the thing that's the most stressful thing to you. What's your, think to yourself, what's your number one stressor? All right? And now, have you tried to reduce the stress in your life? Right? People told you to reduce your stress. Your doctor may have told you to reduce your stress. You may have decided to reduce your stress. Now, I want you to think about that thing that is your stressor, is your number one stressor. Can you get rid of that, whatever it is, practically speaking? No. Okay. So that seems like an effort that's doomed to failure, right? When someone says reduce your stress, and your number one stressor is probably something that if you could have gotten rid of it, you would have, right? And that could be any one of, a million different things. What that stressor is, it doesn't really matter. And that's usually what happens. Someone may tell you, you know what, you need to reduce the stress in your life, and you go out and you say, well, that sounds really good. And then you kind of go through the litany of the things that are stressful for you, and you start to look for the one that you can just easily sort of drop off, right? Just offload, take off of your plate. And unfortunately, large numbers of the things that are most stressful to us aren't things that we can do away with. And strangely enough, I'm okay with that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And that may not make a whole lot of sense. Hopefully it will by the end. So I want to back up a little bit and define for you what I think of as stress. What is my definition of stress? And there are a lot of different ways of looking at that, but I like to boil it down to a very simple yet challenging idea. And that is that stress is the struggle with what is. Okay? Think about that for a second. The struggle with what is. So we're going to be exploring that today and finding some ways to work with that and making some sense out of that. If that sounds a little enigmatic or confusing or philosophical, we'll make it very real. So what I would say is that stressful thing in your life, that number one thing that you pictured, it's not stressful. And I have stood perhaps on more than one occasion in front of a group of people, say a group of people with breast cancer, and said breast cancer is not stressful. And so far no one has hit me with anything or run screaming from the room or anything in between. And the reason I say that is not to discount the gravity of any particular illness, Parkinson's being one of them, but to say that the struggle, the stress, is not in the disease. The stress is not in the situation, the illness, the symptom. The stress is in our relationship with it. So you can meet, here we have a couple hundred people, and you may have met a number of people who have the exact same disorder at about the same stage, and you will find that whole range of people coping with that illness in a whole variety of ways, right? Some people are kind of stoic and kind of, they just kind of plow through it. Other people are very distressed, very upset, anxious, depressed, angry, all of those things, and a whole variety of other ways of coping. amongst all of those different people. So you know that if you meet 10 people with Parkinson's, there are going to be 10 people who are coping with or dealing with the difficulty of Parkinson's in 10 different ways. And, you know, that sort of seems sort of mildly interesting, but it's actually a really big deal when you look at it the way I just suggested, in terms of stress being the struggle with what is. What that means is that there is no suffering in the Parkinson's. The suffering comes from how the person interacts and relates to it. And I'd be willing to bet you money that if you took your number one stressor, or anything that you could identify as a stressor, you could boil it down to one of 3 different kinds of struggles with what is. Okay? So you might do this in your mind, whatever that is that you pictured as a number one stressor. Think about that. I guarantee you it'll fall in one of these 3 categories. Okay? So either it's something that you have and you don't want, so you're pushing something away, okay? Or it's something like having an illness and not wanting it, having a symptom and not wanting it. Okay, so that's one form, having something and not wanting it. The other possibility is wanting something and not having it, like health or money or a relationship or a lost loved one or whatever it might be. So wanting something and not having it. So trying to pull something towards you that you don't have. Or the third possibility is having something and pretending you don't. Denial is a good way to kind of look at that. And I could literally guarantee you that all stress can be categorized in one of those 3 places. Having something, not wanting it, wanting something and not having it, or having something and pretending you don't, or operating as if you don't. And if you came up with something that doesn't fit in that category, I'll talk with you afterwards. We'll settle up. But I think you'll find that things fall into that category. And like I said, it's not just sort of an interesting way of categorizing things. It actually opens up some possibilities for working with things differently. So as psychologists, you might, you know, depending upon your experience with psychologists, you may have a sort of view of what we do.